First off, I want to thank the Kiwanis Club, the local Kiwanis Club, for hosting me tonight. I really appreciate it. So I'm just going to give you a few facts on the Holocaust, even though we all should know it. But from the Holocaust Encyclopedia, in total 6 million Jewish men, women, and children were murdered by the Nazi regime and its allies. Anti-Semitism was at the foundation, which is the hatred of or prejudice against Jews. This is a basic tenet of Nazi ideology. During the Holocaust, Jews were murdered in many places using several methods. The two main methods were poison gas and mass shootings. They were also murdered in other acts of violence and by denying them adequate food, shelter, medical care, and other necessities. But they also murdered millions of non-Jewish people, primarily Soviet POWs, Poles, Romani, Gypsies, Serbs, people with disabilities, and political opponents. But I've been asked to come here to share my father's story, and I'm very proud to do that. My father's name is Norman Roth. He survived the Auschwitz concentration camp. He came from a family of 6 from a small town called Mukachevo or Munkac, Czechoslovakia. He was born in 1929. When he was about 13 years old, his mother sent him to a special school in Hungary, a prep school, to become a surgeon, a doctor. Because what good Jewish mother doesn't want their son to become a doctor, right? And he was going to this prep school when everything kind of went down. He was 13 years old, and during the week he would travel up to Hungary, and then they made them wear the Star of David on their chest, and they didn't allow them to travel anymore. So he was stuck in Hungary away from his family, and he had a family of 6. He had his mother, his father, an older brother, a younger brother, and a younger sister. He took off his Star of David and hid it, got on the train, and made it successfully back to his family. He says he was lucky that he made it back. His family was very happy to see him, and within weeks, they were gathered and taken to the ghetto. It's where they took all the Jewish people to take them from their homes and their villages, and they put them in the ghetto, surrounded them with SS guards, and killed anybody who tried to escape. He said they were there for maybe a couple months. They didn't have any way to really measure time, so he's not exactly sure. There was no word coming in. After about 2 months, they came and took them all, and they went on a march. They didn't know where they were going, but they marched them through their cities. He said it was he knew things were bad, but didn't realize how horrible they were. There were townspeople. It was like a bad sporting event, he said. Townspeople were standing in the streets, cheering them being taken to slaughter, cheering them being taken to the death camps. There was women, there was children, There was children on people's shoulders, screaming obscenities at them, spitting at them. They ended up being taken to a cattle car, a train. They didn't know where they were going. It was very, very crowded on the train. Standing room only. There was no facilities. They were on the train for about 2 to 3 days. Again, time was not something that they could really measure. But he was on there for 2 to 3 days, no facilities, no room to sit down, no room to sleep. That's how they were until they arrived at their destination camp, which was Auschwitz, the death camp. When they took them off of the cattle car, the people that died on the way finally fell over. When they put them into the camp, they had some of the inmates, or whatever you want to call them, came and had to help the SS guards to get them in line and get them through. There was many of them. One of the men that were, I guess you would call them intake, that was also a prisoner, told my dad, who was maybe 14 at the time, make sure that you tell them that you're 18 and stand up straight. Because if you're 18, you're good to work, and that's what they want. And he was a big kid. He was tall for his age. So he took his words when they were taking him through. They asked for his age. He said, I'm 18. He stood up straight because they had a wooden bar that if you couldn't fit or hit it, you were taken to the other line. He said he remembers his youngest sister, who was about 10, and they told her, go into that line. And his mother, they told her to go into that line, which was a work line. He said he remembers his mother taking an absolute fit, not wanting her youngest child to go without her. So they said, okay, then go with her. And his younger brother went also in that line, and that's the last time he ever saw his mother, his sister, and his brother. He later learned that they were taken to the crematorium and gassed. So he went into Auschwitz, his father and his older sister. He lived right outside of the main part of Auschwitz. There was a SS guard that picked him out. He was a young kid, he was strong, he was healthy compared to a lot of the people. And he picked him out to take care of his horses and run errands for him. And he said, again, I was lucky, because that was one of the better jobs. He said he would go into town and deliver food for the SS troops and take supplies in and out. He said the guard was a true Jekyll and Hyde. One moment, he would give him the heel of a piece of bread, and he was so happy because he could sneak that back in and feed his father some food. And the next moment, he would hit him over the head with a baton. So you never knew what you were getting. But, he said, the best part of his job was when he got to care for the horses. Because to the horses, he was still a human. The horses treated him okay. And he could steal some of their rotten food, their rotten apples, their rotten carrots, and feed it to his father so his father could live. So he said those were the best moments. They also, I forgot to mention, when he went into the camp, they stamped him with a number because you were no longer human. My father was 10437. That's what he was referred to as. So they were in this camp. Again, he was there for a couple years, watched many people die. It was all around him. He said his father just kept telling him, just keep your head down and do what you got to do, and you'll make it. Keep your head down, do what you got to do. And he said he lived that. Then one day, the guards came and told them, we're moving you. They didn't know why. It turns out, in hindsight, the Soviet troops were getting close to where they were, because they were in Hungary, and they didn't want them to see what was truly going on. So they went on a march. They now call this the Death March. They marched for days, freezing conditions. My father got frostbite. And he said one of the memories that he'll never forget was there was an older man who was stumbling to walk. He could barely walk, and he fell over. And one of the guards hit him with the rifle and said, get up. And he couldn't. And my dad said he heard the man scream out in Yiddish, which was the language, the dialect that they spoke, saying, God, please save me. And then he was shot with the rifle. And my dad said, again, the lesson, keep your head down, keep going. Because had he said anything, they would have killed him also. They ended up at a camp in Germany. They were there for a few weeks. At that time, they were still guarded, but they weren't forced to work. They didn't know what was happening. A couple weeks later, the American Allied troops showed up and liberated them. He said that was the first time, even though he looked at these people, he saw them daily, that he realized how horrible they looked. Because he said grown men walked in to where they were and wept, got down on their hands and knees, and just wept at the condition that these people were in. He said the Allied troops were good to them. They fed them, they clothed them. They didn't really know, anybody didn't know at this point the war is breaking up. Everything is trying to go back to as normal as it could be. But there were all these people, and where do they go? So they said, we'll send you back to where you're from. Oh, the one thing my dad did say, the American commander from the troops, because my dad said there was piles of bodies, just piles, mountains of dead bodies. He made the townspeople come out and bury all the bodies, and he let my dad watch. So at that point, they sent them back to where they came from. His father survived, and his older sister survived. So it was a family of 6 that was now a family of 3. They got sent back to where they were, but it wasn't Czechoslovakia anymore. It wasn't Hungary anymore. It was now Russia. They didn't want to live in communist Russia, but once they were sent there, they were not free to leave. They wouldn't let them leave. So they had made plans to escape. They could only allow so many to escape during one day. And so he went one day, and his father and his sister were going to go the next day. And they told him, wait in Hungary here for us. We'll be there. He successfully made it across. At this point, he's 17 years old. He stood in Hungary for 2 weeks waiting for his father and his sister, and they never showed up. He said he just wandered. slept in the streets. Finally found a kibbutz that accepted him. He joined. They took him into Germany. Then he found out that they were communist also, so he escaped them and ended up in a displaced persons camp in Germany. The displaced persons camp had a program where minor children that were orphaned could be sent to the United States as long as they found a sponsor family, because they weren't just allowed to come. It had to be a family that paid for them. And the other condition was he had to speak English. So he learned English really quickly. There were people in the camp that taught the kids how to give them a chance to do better by themselves. And then he came to the United States and ended up with a family in Dover, Delaware. When he came, he had an uncle that lived in New York that was his father's brother, and he was here from before that. And so he had a little bit of family here. And he started going to school and getting his high school equivalency, and then he wanted to go to college because he had to support himself. And then they drafted him into the Army and sent him to Korea for a year. But then he came back, and he met my mother. They got married, and he became an electrical engineer by trade. And at some point in the future, he had an opportunity with my mother's brothers to go into business for themselves. And he said he never wanted anybody to be in charge of him. That scared him. So he took the opportunity and came back to Pittsburgh and went into the grocery business. And of course had me. When my dad was in this, so you gotta remember, he was freed when he was about 17. That was the last he saw his father. When he was in his 40s, he got a phone call, so almost 30 years later, a little less, from his uncle in New York, that his father was alive. So needless to say, we were on a plane heading to Israel the next day. What happened was his father went to escape Russia with his sister. They weren't caught, but somebody with them was. They escaped, but didn't escape out. So they were stuck in Russia until the early 70s, when they were allowed to leave, and they left. And they went to Israel. He called up, or got in touch with, he knew he had a brother in New York. And his brother told him, you know, your son's here. And he had no idea. So we were on a plane to Israel the next day. I was probably in like 4th grade. I didn't really know what was going on. But it was culture shock, to say the least. If any of you have ever seen Fiddler on the Roof, I felt like I walked onto the set. Here was this man with the hat and it was like, oh my goodness. And he was so poor. He had remarried. He had a new wife. He had 5 new kids. 3 of them were severely disabled because while they were in Russia, they didn't have any medical care or any proper care. So 3 of them were very severely disabled. My grandfather didn't really speak English, but he said a few words. One of them was okay. And you could tell, even at that young age, I could see how proud he was of his American son. who made it. He made it. My dad had one of those Kodak cameras, remember, with the photo that would come out? My grandfather, one of the other words he knew was magician, because he never saw such a thing. He thought it was a magic trick, and my father was this great magician that could do these tricks. But in hindsight, what I didn't realize was just how horrible and how uncomfortable it was for him. It was great seeing his father. But it had to be very strange to see him married to another woman and having all these new kids that are suddenly your family too. But they kept in touch, and we went there many times to go see them. And his sister had survived also, so we got to know her and, the family. My father was a very quiet, stoic man. He didn't use a lot of words. He only used them when necessary. And he never spoke of his experience. As a matter of fact, when he came into the United States, one of the first things he did was burn the number off of his arm because he didn't want to look at it. But one day, after he had retired, moved to Florida, he was in a restaurant. There was a line at the buffet, and there was a man in line in front of him, and he looked at his arm, and he had a number on it. And it was one number off of his. And when he spoke to the man said to him, "Hey, were you the guy that guy said to say you were 18? My dad was like, "Yeah." And he goes, "I overheard that, and I said I was 18. And that's probably why I'm alive today." But the man got my father to start, he encouraged him to speak about his story. My father never wanted to speak of it. I knew it from my mother, bits and pieces. I never heard my father speak of it. Never. The only thing that I knew that my dad was affected was he used to scream out in the middle of the night in his sleep. As kids, I would just shake him and say, "You're screaming again." And, okay. But that's when he's have horrible nightmares. That's the only effect, physical effect that I saw, besides him being quiet and probably unemotional and emotionally unavailable, because he didn't know how to do those things. But he got him to speak of his story, and my father made a video of his story, and he shared it with me. And I'm forever grateful, because otherwise we wouldn't know his story. And the people that knew him, they knew he didn't speak of it. Never. So what effects, besides him being emotionally unavailable, and besides him screaming in his sleeps, did it have on us? Probably a few that I don't even really realize. I know that when I was younger, I suffered greatly from anxiety, which people might think, not you, I'm pretty calm. I hid it. I never had any of the symptoms of anxiety, but they found out that Holocaust descendants, most of them have horrible anxiety because it actually becomes embedded in the genes of that person because they think they're going to need it to survive. Then they pass it on to their descendants. So, thanks, Nazis. And then I, of course, passed it on to mine. But other than that, he was just a quiet man. He went about his life. He was a good man. He was a good man. And I'm so happy that he shared his story with me. The other thing that you could never do around my father was win a pity party with him. Ever. People kind of say, you know, you have a pretty good attitude. You don't really get too hyper about things, too upset about things. Well, let's just say there was never an opportunity. I couldn't win. If I didn't want to go to school, why? Is it because you don't feel good? Are they going to kill you at school today? Are they going to beat you? Are they going to kill your mother? No. Well, then go to school, okay, and be happy about it, okay? And generally, I take it to heart in all situations that no matter what I'm going through in life now, it could never be that. It could never be that. So that's a great lesson that he learned, or taught me. The FBI defines a hate crime as a committed criminal offense motivated in whole or part by the offender's biases. A bias can be race, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, disability, or gender identity. Every year since 2014, hate crimes have gone up. Every year. Pennsylvania, for example, has 72 active hate groups. The majority of them are clustered around the Philly area. If you have any time, just Google Ulysses, PA, which is northeast Pennsylvania. It's an area known for its white supremacist activity and Nazi sympathizers. Most hate crimes, I believe, are committed by those who aren't exposed, taught, or willing to listen and or learn from others who are different from themselves. If you get one thing from all of this, I urge everyone to talk to and listen to those that are different from yourself, whether it's a different race, gender, religion, someone LGBTQ, or just the kid down the street with the blue hair. I think it's a lot harder to hate somebody that you know. And with that, I'd like to introduce you to my father.
Hi, my name is Norman Roth. I was born in a town called Mukachevo, which was then Czechoslovakia. At about the mid-43, the Germans weren't too happy the way the Hungarian government is handling Jews, giving them all the freedom. So they took over a lot of control of everything. And one of the first things they did is prohibit Jews from attending that school, the prep school. So they threw me out of the school. I couldn't, and I stayed in Budapest. And also we were supposed to wear a star now, Star of David. And the Jews weren't allowed to ride a train. Now, I had no way to go back home except by train. So I stayed in Budapest for a few months. I worked for a Jewish manufacturer of watches and jewelry store. And then I really wanted to get back home, and the only way I can do it is I have to take off my Star of David and take the train as a Gentile, and hopefully, I was hoping that they didn't catch me. Because if they did, who knows what would have happened. So finally, but I was lucky. I went through, got back home. My parents were very happy that I came. And just as within weeks, the Germans came in and made us all move to a ghetto, all the Jews. So we went to this ghetto, all crowded. We had a very large Jewish population in that area. And we stayed there and struggled for about maybe 3 months. And then the Germans came and marched us into to a railroad station. And as we were marching all across, they had some Gentiles stay up there making all kinds of gestures and, and like going this way and so on. And they loaded us into this cattle car and took us, I don't remember how many days, 4 or 5 days by the time we got to Auschwitz. Now again, I really got lucky because as they were unloading us from the train in Auschwitz, they had Jewish prisoners that were helping the Germans unload the railroad cars. The guy was telling me in Yiddish, Zucht sei, that du bist 18 Jahre alt. In other words, tell the Germans when they ask you, tell them you're 18 years old. And I think that saved my life, because when they asked me, anybody under 18 they put with children, and most of them were killed. So I was lucky that, that when I told them I was 18 years old. So I was lucky, and they took me to a labor camp outside of Auschwitz, and they assigned me to take care of some horses for one of the SS soldiers, that was responsible for it. And I cleaned them and I drove them for him, and I used to go into the main camp, Birkenau, to pick up food for the SS and the guards. So, and I was riding with this SS guy with me. He was like a Mr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Some days he was really good to me and he even gave me some food. And other times, he hit me in the head with a rifle or whatever, for no reason at all. But the times that he gave me food, my father also happened to be in the same place. So I used to share the food with my father whenever I got. I was lucky in that respect. We were a family of 4. My older sister, whose name was, Yiddish name was Leichu, they called her. She was a year and a half older than I am. She went to the concentration camp, and she survived also. Then I had a younger brother, who was a year and a half younger than me. He was taken with the children, and I don't know what happened to him. And my mother and my sister, she was born in 1934, and this was 44. She was about 10 years old. And one thing I do remember, they wanted my mother, because at that time she was about 40 years old. They wanted her in the labor camp, but she wouldn't let my sister go. So they said, okay, they took her, allowed her to stay with my sister.
And you never saw them again?
Never saw them, no. Well, we knew after what happened to these people. They marched them right straight into the crematoriums. Religion is something I just can't believe in what I saw. There's no way in the world that a God would allow, if there was such a thing, this to happen. And I've seen, really, I can't get out of my mind when they marched us from Auschwitz to the train station, that one of the guys was not able to walk, just barely walking. And the German guy came with his rifle. Before he shot him, the guy yelled out in Jewish, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, and the guy shot him right there after he. And it's hard to come out, to even forget about something like that. And so I respect religion, but I don't believe in, because I don't know what God selected us as for what, It's very hard. Especially to his chosen people, you know what I mean? What he chooses for.
After being liberated from Auschwitz-Birkenau, surviving the Death March to the newly communist Russian territory, which used to be his hometown, escaping the Iron Curtain, leaving the communist kibbutz, entering Germany and living in a displaced persons camp, learning English, and then living with a sponsor family in Delaware, this happened to my father.
First time I met her, I was already in the Army, and I stayed in Teaneck, New Jersey, my aunt's place. I was supposed to go to Korea the following week. She and her mother came in to a bar mitzvah in New York. And bar mitzvah happens to be people from our region, from our towns. And every time they had a bar mitzvah, a wedding, whatever, they invited everybody in the area, from that town to come. So that's how she came and her mother. And I was supposed to go probably in the following week to go to Korea. And friends of mine, was throwing a special party, for us to go to. But my uncle made me take her out instead, because she. So he said, "You must do it," So I did it. Okay, and she was young. She was 16. I was 21, and she was still a child. Okay, but I was, accommodating to my uncle. Okay, now, about 4 or 5 years later, again, there was a wedding. She came in, but then she was grown up already. So my uncle didn't have to force me to take her out. I wanted to take her out myself. And this is how we got started.
My father asked if we were the chosen people. Chosen for what? He couldn't answer the question. If there was a God, why would he let this happen? Why? I suppose we will never know. Could it have been to show us the remarkable power and promise of the smallest grain of hope amid utter death and despair? To show us how indomitable the human spirit can be? Or was it meant to serve as a warning for the potential of an eventual demise of all of mankind if we don't learn? It is rumored that if you visit the Auschwitz death camp now, there are no birds. Actually, I believe this is a myth which has been dispelled. However, what I do know is my father said in the concentration camp the sounds of the birds' songs were very important because it reminded the prisoners there was still life outside of the walls of that deadly place. Look at these images. Please don't avert your eyes. Not only were millions of human lives lost, but with them came the death of millions of marriages which never happened, children who were never born, grandchildren who were never born. For a moment, imagine you are in that ghastly and ungodly place, surrounded by nothing but death, despair, starvation, sickness, cruelty, and evil. Now close your eyes and imagine you hear this.
And the songbirds are singing like they know the score. And I love you, I love you, I love you like never before. And I wish you all the love in the world. But most of all, I wish it from myself. And the songbirds keep singing like they know the score. And I love you, I love you, I love you like never before. Like never before. Like never before.
My parents were married over 60 years. They died one day apart. It took my dad a long time to share his story with me, and now I share his story with you so that you will share it with your children and they will share it with theirs. We can never forget.
For you, there'll be no more crying. For you, the sun will be shining.
And that's the story of my father. 10437, or just Daddy to me. Thank you all for coming. It means the world to me. Please go out and let's be kind to each other, and let's learn, and never let it happen again. Thank you very much.
I'm Maureen Reynolds. I'm the president of the Kiwanis Club of Sheridan, and I want to thank you. With just this a certificate of appreciation, and also recognize you as our for the month of November, our community service, community award-winning for above and beyond. Thank you for sharing your story.
I thank you all from the bottom of my heart. Thank you. Thank you.